Well, here we are in the Concorde hangar at Heathrow. Behind me, aircraft Golf Bravo Oscar Alpha Delta, the fourth of the British Airways Concordes. And very shortly, this aeroplane will be pushed back and will be towed to the gate at Terminal 4, ready for a very special journey. This is not simply a scheduled flight to New York or even Barbados. This aeroplane is ready for its trip around the world.
Since 1976, Concorde has flown from London and Paris to New York's John F. Kennedy Airport up to 3 times a day, plying the Atlantic Ocean in just over 3 hours at twice the speed of sound. But rarely has this evocative aircraft ventured beyond these shores. In 1999, however, history was made and speed records broken as Concorde undertook the ultimate trip, a full circumnavigation of the globe. In October 1999, 80 specially invited wealthy American travellers boarded this BA Concorde for what was to become a 22-day, never-to-be-repeated, record-breaking flight into the history books.
This is the start of our round-the-world charter, 17 days away for us, where we have a bonding with the passengers. It's a one-off, total one-off. We have to be able to blend together, work under pressure, and to get on with everybody, passengers, crew, everybody alike. Coming crew, seats to take off, please.
This is just the first leg of our Abercrombie and Kent Round the World tour by Concorde, flying from New York over to Vancouver. I'm Jeff Mussett, the PR on this particular flight, and taking the opportunity to come back and have a word with the passengers. And my job really is to make sure that they're informed of what's going on in the flight, take some of the load off the flight deck crew. We're going supersonic over land, which is most unusual for Concorde, and they've got to navigate very accurately to stick to the flight plan that's been agreed with the Canadian authorities. So what we've done is come north from New York towards Montreal and started a supersonic acceleration 300 miles north of Montreal. And that's taken us right up over Hudson Bay and round north of Churchill, and then we're going to come all the way to the west, down by Peace River in Alberta, down in towards Vancouver, getting about an hour and a half of supersonic flight time. There are very few areas in the world where we can do this, so we're always quite excited to do these overland supersonic segments. We've climbed up now to 55,000 feet, and for some people this is the first time they've been supersonic, so it's a great thrill for them as well.
The excitement in the air was also matched on the ground as last-minute preparations took place for the imminent arrival of this rare supersonic visitor.
Concorde's about to arrive in roughly 10 minutes. It's coming from Kennedy Airport, actually flying out of its way to go supersonic across the top of Canada, and stop here for about an hour 45, and then it carries on to Kona, big island of Hawaii. First time it came here was July of 1986 when Maggie Thatcher came on it to open British Week at Expo 86. It was here once last year, so this is actually the third time it's arrived in Vancouver. We'll get a fair number of people out on the ramp, airline staff that are very interested in an airplane that you don't see in this area very often.
With the vast Pacific crossing still ahead, Vancouver was to prove the most strategic link on the route. This was the most westerly crewed BA outpost on the journey, and as such, successful planning at this stage was to be absolutely critical to the overall success of the entire round-the-world flight. From here on, Concorde was, for all intents and purposes, on her own. Spare parts such as tyres had to be loaded into the rear cabin, and specially trained London-based ground engineers flown out to check every part of the aircraft in fine detail before permission would be granted to allow the flight to depart the 3,000 miles to Hawaii. In addition, 2 highly qualified Concorde engineers travelled aboard in case of problems. One of Concorde's limitations is range in hot conditions, with each additional kilo of weight reducing distance. With a full payload of passengers, all with 3 weeks' worth of luggage and some heavy spare parts, Captain Jeff Musset had to make some careful calculations, not just for this section, but for the following 2 as well. The most worrying problem for the crew and ground engineers was the second leg of the Pacific crossing from Hawaii to Fiji, which fell at the very limit of Concorde's range. As the new cabin crew, flown out especially from London, prepared for their own trip of a lifetime, the flurry of activity on the ground continued as the minutes ticked away prior to departure. With the first leg of this trans-Pacific crossing over in just over 2.5 hours, the volcanic, and it has to be said somewhat featureless island of Hawaii played host to Concorde Alpha Delta, its passengers and crew, for the next 3 days. Having left the cold and damp of a Vancouver October afternoon a mere 150 minutes earlier, the warm evening sunshine of Hawaii was a welcome boost for all on board. With the workload over for a day or 2, the flight deck and cabin crew chartered a private yacht for a day's snorkeling in the warm Pacific waters. With Concorde's regular route structure largely limited to New York, the temptation amongst the crew to soak up the relaxed atmosphere of the Pacific was a welcome change from the hustle and bustle of midtown Manhattan and was to prove too much to resist. Hawaii's Kona Airport must be one of the most laid-back in America, with open-air departure lounges and an abundance of colourful flowers that made for a pleasant and relaxing atmosphere as passengers waited to depart. Volcanic lava surrounding the runways fast disappearing, Concorde was to head off for its longest and trickiest Pacific sector, across 3,200 miles of nothing but ocean.
There aren't very many spare airfields to go to on the longer segments, and of course you begin to realise how enormous the Pacific is. We're doing 1,000 miles an hour, and yet it takes us maybe 2.5 hours to get from one island chain to another until we get right over to the Western Pacific.
Absolutely, I think we noticed it more when people in Hawaii, who we met earlier, spoke about taking 6 or 7 hours from the West Coast,
yes,
when it took us 2.5
hours. Yes.
What is also quite interesting is our rate of climb here. I mean,
yes,
because we're closer to the equator, in fact, the air is colder in the upper atmosphere, isn't it?
Very much so. Obviously, the lower air is warmer, and then we go through the tropopause when the temperature shears off very quickly. And once we start getting through that, the temperature goes down, then of course the aircraft starts climbing really well again, about 1,000 feet a minute. And we're getting up to more 60,000 feet on these sectors.
Yeah. So of course this is something that wouldn't really happen on a New York run. I mean, you'd be lucky to get to 58,000 feet going.
I think in all the time I've been on Concorde, I think I've only got to 60,000 feet 3 times over the Atlantic. And it's odd because the upper air is very cold over the tropics and not over the poles. It's just the height of the tropopause.
Right. What about operationally, dealing with air traffic control? I mean, they're not used to these block altitudes that we fly in. I mean, does that pose its own problems?
We take quite a lot of trouble to get this set up in advance, and certain areas we have to get the permission and get the permits. Once we've got that, then things seem to work pretty smoothly. And once we've cleared 40,000 feet, they're delighted because we've got no other conflicting traffic at all. As we get down towards Fiji, of course, we have got some island chains, and about 500 miles off to the east we've got the Gilbert and Ellice Islands as we cross the equator. But also if you went way off to the east, you'd have Tahiti and so on. Just had a competition to check the time over the international date line, and the prize for that was for somebody to come up for the landing into Sydney. And the nearest person got within 8 seconds of the right time, which was pretty good. We gave them a guide of between 1.5 and 3 hours, so we thought they did pretty well. But of course it's slightly odd because the date line doesn't go straight down 180 degrees east-west. It actually comes down and then peels off towards the east. So nobody could really cheat on that one because they didn't know where we were going to cross it.
From the flight deck side window, the view of Fiji's main island coming into view was a welcome sight for the crew aboard. The imminent arrival of this rare visitor, a cause of curiosity for the local population, some of whom went to extraordinary lengths to get a better view. With sadly only just over an hour to refuel the aircraft, the onboard engineers having to check all the systems were continuing to function properly, there was little time to explore this diverse chain of islands nestled in the beautiful South Seas. As the minutes ticked away and the final preparations were being made for the last leg across the Pacific to Sydney, the passengers were serenaded Fiji style with a dual rendition of the John Denver number on a jet plane.
Every place I go, and I'm thinking of you. Every song I sing, and I'm singing for you. And I'll come back, and I'll bring your waiting ring. Waiting ring. So kiss me, and smile for me. Tell me that you wait for me. Hold me like you never let me go. 'Cause I'm leaving on a jet plane, leaving on a jet plane, leaving on a jet plane. Bye-bye. Have a nice trip. Bye-bye.
With the skyline of Australia's most famous city only 2 hours away, the crossing of the world's largest ocean at Mach 2 was rapidly becoming part of aviation history. Having crossed half the world in record-breaking time, the realization of what we'd achieved started to set in. As the passengers continued to enjoy the buzz of Sydney, having covered a staggering 11,447 miles since departing New York, Concorde Alpha Delta was well due for a service. Whilst down under, there was no shortage of Qantas engineers volunteering for the task, under the watchful eye of BA's own Concorde technicians, the supersonic jet receiving a thorough check. With a warning light indicating a possible fault earlier, with one of the aircraft's inertial navigation system boxes, a new replacement was flown in especially from London, ready for Concorde's departure later in the day. 7 days into the trip and 4 sectors behind them. Back in town, the passengers checked out at their luxury hotel for the 20-minute drive back to the departure gate at Sydney's main Kingsford Smith Airport. As they negotiated the Sydney freeways, the crew were already on the tarmac waiting for Concorde Alpha Delta's arrival from the hangar. As the aircraft was slowly towed along the web of airport taxiways towards the gate, with departure only an hour away, the race against time to fully prepare the supersonic jet for departure was to begin. On board, it was literally all hands on deck as the scheduled departure time edged ever closer.
Okay, everybody, as soon as you finish your press, will you give me a shout, because they're dying to board passengers anyway. I know it's difficult with everybody around, but as soon as you can get things going, you let me know.
So we're stubborn then? Absolutely.
To add to the complications of the late arrival of the aircraft on the gate, the crew were busy putting the finishing touches to the reroute that would add 2 hours to the journey time.
Originally, we were going to be flying supersonically right across the centre of Australia at Mach 2, but because of the situation in East Timor, we're not now flying to Bali, we're flying to Bangkok, and it's just beyond the range of the aircraft. So we're actually going to be flying supersonically up the Gold Coast, past the Great Barrier Reef, to the Pacific island of Guam. There we will refuel and then make a left turn out, crossing the north of the Philippines before landing in Bangkok. Today is going to be a very long sector, as you can see from this map, as we fly all the way to the north here before making this left-hand turn to Bangkok.
With 7,186 miles and a refueling stop in Guam ahead, this sector was to prove the most testing yet for the crew, both in the cabin and on the flight deck.
Around the world speed record flight of October 12th to 13th, 92. Did Guam Bangkok in 3 hours, 0 minutes, and 39 seconds. We got permission to boom Imelda Marcos' hometown, a place called Tacloban, Philippines. We can't do that again. We're going to go around the northern tip of the Philippines, so that's 3 hours and 16 minutes. Yeah, some of you also asked me why we're taking such a circuitous routing. The Concorde has a problem with rough runways, and since last summer they've had to measure the runways for roughness everywhere it goes. Nobody ever got around to measuring either Darwin, Australia, or Perth, Australia, both of which would have made for a shorter flight today. Guam, however, has been measured.
After a gourmet lunch at the highest and fastest restaurant on the planet, a view of the Great Barrier Reef was just visible as we flew on the edges of the stratosphere, 59,000 feet up, 12 miles above the Earth.
In the last half an hour or so, we have been just touching 60,000 feet, which is the highest altitude at which Concorde can fly, which is the first time we've done it on this particular trip. And that was because of the very cold air over the equatorial area. We've now started our deceleration into Guam, where we should be landing in 25 minutes. conditions, quite a warm, sticky day there. Fresh wind, temperature is 31 degrees Celsius, and that is 88 degrees Fahrenheit. Thank you.
More money on it.
By the time the passengers had reboarded the aircraft, the warm early evening sunshine had given way to darkness, and the only non-daylight sector would begin. As the passengers began to doze, enthusiasm showed no signs of waning in the back.
As you go away, the sun goes down. Just as it's gone down, of course, you get to the sunrise. That'd be good.
This has been my first trip on Concorde. It's an opportunity that I would never ever have dreamt of having, and the takeoff was absolutely exhilarating. You know, the noise and the sheer power was just unbelievable. I'd do it again and again, over and over.
As Concorde flies faster than the Earth rotates, in effect the plane flies back in time. A remarkable effect of departing in darkness shortly after sunset is that Concorde actually catches the sun up, resulting in a westerly sunrise shortly after the sun has already set that day. Concorde was the only civil aircraft in the world that was able to give witness to this extraordinary phenomenon.
This is the first time I've ever been on Concorde. Obviously I fly the 747-400, which I've had a command of for the last 10 years. It's a beaut aircraft, but this thing is just another quantum leap ahead. The performance is incredible. That's the only way you can describe it. It looks very, very sensitive. The pilots tell me it's very nice to fly. The systems are good. Of course, it's older technology, but it seems to work extremely well. And it really gets up and goes. I've never seen an acceleration like it. With a lift-off speed of some 195 knots, that's typically about 40 knots faster than a 747. And a climb-out speed of about 220 knots. That's a lot faster than we go as well. The acceleration from there is just incredible, right through the transonic region. As you can probably see, we're cruising just on Mach 2.0 now, and that compares to the 747 of a Mach number of around about 0.85, so it's a lot faster. On the descent, the approach, it does fly faster. Again, it handles very well, watching the way the pilots fly it. And really, from a pilot's point of view, it's just an awesome piece of machinery. I guess what I'm really saying is I'd love to fly it.
As Concorde descended and decelerated to subsonic speeds over the Philippines, a new day awaited and a new culture dawned as the magic of the Orient came into view. The Thai capital Bangkok was a truly exciting and diverse city, with hotels of unsurpassed luxury, to busy rivers and canals, to the traditions and cultures of the old Siam, which have been passed on from generation to generation. All this just a short ride away from two of Bangkok's most famous sights. The American explorer Jim Thompson's traditional wooden house, and the sensational Golden Palace. The next day, back at Bangkok's international airport, Concorde took her place alongside more conventional subsonic jets prior to heading west over the Bay of Bengal to Madras in southern India. As was always the case when Concorde flew into unsupersonically charted territory, careful additional calculations were made to take into account the weight of the fully loaded aircraft, temperature on the ground, and emergency alternate airfields in case of problems. On this trip, nothing was left to chance.
Well, we're on the move now, just pushed back from our gate here at Bangkok, and we're taxiing out towards the runway. It's a mere 1 hour and 30 minutes across the Bay of Bengal from here to Madras in southern India. Well, Bangkok, as we've seen, is a city of huge contrasts, but I wonder what our passengers are going to make of our next destination.
Bird 990-995 Charlie, glad to land runway 25, wind 200 degrees 10 knots. Affirm and taxi with caution and slower speed.
Even before landing, the heat haze clearly visible from the cockpit and the bouncy final approach was a clear indication that the weather outside was to be hot and steamy.
200 feet. 100 feet, 50, 40, 30, 20, 15.
British Airways 990-905 Charlie landed 07. Taxi via Foxtrot Golf. Stand 30. Follow me, Jeep.
Foxtrot Golf 30, follow me.
British Airways 990-95 Charlie, follow me Jeep is terminating, follow me service, follow martial arts.
Concorde 990-95 Charlie, follow martial arts. Bye-bye.
Bye, and request your departure place time.
Departed Bangkok, stand by the time. 9/10 tops.
If anywhere in the world was chosen to depict living examples of different centuries, it was India. In the sprawling southern metropolis of Madras, it was easy to find vehicles of the 1950s, together with modes of transport of a truly bygone era. With no direct normal traffic between India and East Africa, the Indian authorities refused to give permission to allow a direct westerly route after departure, posing a massive headache for the crew. With the authorities insisting that Concorde first flies south to Sri Lanka before turning west across the Indian Ocean, the fuel range was to become critical.
Coming crew, seats for takeoff, please.
With nowhere to refuel along the route, the only way the aircraft could stay the course on this unwelcome longer journey was to depart early in the morning, before the heat of the day limited a takeoff with a full load of passengers and fuel.
We keep the throttles fully forward from the start of the takeoff roll on these sectors, and they stay there until we start our deceleration. So we're using maximum power all the time, except for when we use the afterburners. And when we reach Mach 2, it will continue to climb until the rate of climb stops, and then our climb is determined by the burning of the fuel, reduction of the weight. And we gradually climb, usually at about 50 or 60 feet a minute, until we hit 60,000 feet, if indeed we get there before we start to slow down. So you can expect to see the climb continue throughout the flight. Thank you.
With some fantastic views of southern Sri Lanka out of the window, rarely seen from the air, let alone at twice the speed of sound on Concorde, this sector was to prove not just one of the most challenging for the crew, but one of the most interesting for the passengers. The normal route between the Indian subcontinent and East Africa is long and tortuous, and normally involves a change in the Middle East. To travel between these two very different worlds in a little over 3 hours was to be a memorable experience.
Well, we're now on our sector across the Indian Ocean.
Yes.
We've left Madras in southern India about 2 hours ago, 2.5 hours ago, and we're now starting our deceleration into Nairobi.
Yes, indeed.
Now, it's been interesting, hasn't it? Because, of course, we've been ducking and diving islands.
Yes. We did a straight acceleration out of Madras, which meant going off the coast of India, but then staying down the east coast of India, going right down the east coast of Sri Lanka, turning right round there, and then heading off across the Indian Ocean.
And that was quite a fun, tight turn.
Oh, it was, yes. Got a lovely view of Sri Lanka today, yes. And then, of course, we had to make a passage between some of the islands and the Maldives, and then we've come north of the Seychelles towards the African coast, and we're just slowing down now. But it's been supersonic since 11 minutes after takeoff.
And, of course, we've pretty well covered all the ocean.
The Atlantic yet to do, of course, is the last leg for them. We've done the Pacific, been across Indian Ocean, Bay of Bengal, and got a couple of lovely supersonic segments to come, one up the Red Sea, which we haven't done before, and another one up the Adriatic to Venice, which is a route we used to do years ago before the Bosnian crisis, but we're going to do that one. And then, of course, we've got the final one across the Atlantic. So,
As Mount Kenya loomed out of the clouds, high above the African plains, the engines were throttled back and the grasslands around the suburbs of Nairobi came into view as we approached the Kenyan capital ahead of schedule. been aboard since Vancouver, with the exception of Captain Jeff Mussett, prepared to leave the aircraft for the last time, their trip of a lifetime having come to an end.
We're just taxiing into the terminal. We'll be on the gate in just about a minute's time, right on schedule at 11:30. Captain Mussett, I'm sure, has told you, he takes over command of the airplane and flies you for the rest of the round-the-world trip. And your new CSD cabin service director will be Nettie Sayers, the new lady in the cabin team. Just remains for the team that are getting off and leaving you here to wish you a very pleasant time here in Kenya and a pleasant rest of your tour around the world. I do wish you a nice time and love to see you aboard another Concorde. Until then, with great sadness, we from the cockpit and the cabin team leaving you say goodbye.
Julie, we've reached Nairobi and 2/3 of the way around the world. It's been quite an amazing trip, hasn't it?
It's been fantastic. Passengers have been lovely. The crew have all got on really well. We've enjoyed going that extra mile and doing all the special things that you can do on a trip like this. It's completely different to a scheduled New York trip.
What struck me is the sort of the enthusiasm of the passengers versus the New York, where people are really just doing it because it's a business tour.
Yeah.
We get them to New York quickly for
Well,
work.
the attitude's different as soon as they get on board. They're just here to enjoy themselves, and they've all been really nice. Had a great time.
It's been so different because of the type of passenger that we've encountered. They've been so enthusiastic themselves about wanting to come away and visit various cities from all over the world.
And of course, for somebody like you who commutes to and from New York on Concorde all the time, coming to these long-haul destinations is quite unusual.
Oh yeah, it's been great coming to some of these fantastic islands that we've seen. Sydney was probably the highlight. We were invited to the opera, and we've just had a fantastic time.
From the flight crew all the way, down to the cabin crew, we've felt a unique bond in this, in fact, not just among ourselves, but also with our passengers that we've looked after. So it's that bond and that closeness and that relatedness that we've built up as a unit of people over the period of the last 2 weeks or so. It's one of the highlights as well.
Having exchanged the leather-clad seats of Concorde for something a bit more down to earth, the awe-inspiring Masai Mara game park was to prove Kenya's highlight. Although out in the bush, the passengers were far from being high and dry. The unique game lodge at Kichwa Tembo was to offer a unique mix of fine food and wines in basic yet comfortable and certainly unique accommodation. This was environmental tourism that needed no PR spin to sell it. Six days later, on a rainy morning, Concorde Alpha Delta prepared for departure as a sister BA Jumbo taxied into position after a long overnight flight from London. After takeoff for Jordan and having taken in 8 vastly differing cultures around the world in just over 2 weeks, the passengers had got used to the unexpected. However, they could be forgiven for not second-guessing what was about to be thrown at them.
Here is your trivia question. as we're flying over Djibouti. Djibouti is one of only 3 countries in the world that does not contain any of the letters from the word mackerel. What are the other 2 countries? First correct answer to the Limey tour guide will win a prize.
Well, this is certainly one of the more interesting sectors of the flight. We're presently flying between Nairobi and Aqaba up the Red Sea at Mach 2 at 60,000 feet, the highest the aircraft can fly. It's a particularly precise bit of flying, this, because if we veer off course slightly to the left or the right, there's a danger that the sonic boom can be heard either by Sudan on the left-hand side of the aircraft or by Saudi Arabia on the right. So we have to ensure that flying at these speeds, at this height, that we keep exactly to the path.
Aqaba approach, Speedbird Concorde 95 Charlie. Good morning.
Speedbird 95 Charlie, good morning, sir.
We're still with Cairo, but we're 86 DLE from Aqaba, descending to flight level 150.
Speedbird 95 Charlie, roger, sir. No delay expected for runway 01. Report when released from Cairo and request METSA estimate, please.
METSA 37, and understand we can expect a straight-in runway 01.
Speedbird 95 Charlie, just to confirm METSA 1037.
1037, A firm.
As the southern Jordanian airport at Aqaba drew nearer, the crew encountered a communication problem with local air traffic control.
Speedbird 95 Charlie, we no longer have two-way with Cairo.
Speedbird 95 Charlie, understand you lose contact with Cairo?
Cairo control, Speedbird Concorde 95 Charlie.
Cairo, this is Saudi 1371, good afternoon. We are trying to contact Cairo control through the Amman Control Center.
1371 from Speedbird 95 Charlie, do you read?
I copy, sir. I copy, Saudi 371.
Oh, 371. Can you get release from Cairo to Aqaba control for us, please?
With the help of a passing Saudi Airlines jumbo acting as go-between, the desert runway at Aqaba came into view.
Yeah, you see, I think it's just over there, to the left of the other road. Yeah.
From America to the South Seas of the Pacific and onto Australia, from the far east of Asia to India and onto the open grasslands of East Africa, it was now time to enter a different world, that of Arabia.
300. Director? Yes, correct. 49. Later from the cunning man.
Jordan is a fascinating Arabian kingdom with a barren yet beautiful mountainous landscape. After 2 days of soaking up desert sun came the jewel in the Arabian crown, a breathtaking example of ancient design. Hewn from the surrounding sandstone mountains, the treasury at Petra. After 2 days, it was time to bid farewell to this beautiful desert landscape and head back to Aqaba Airport, where our small team of dedicated engineers were giving Concorde a thorough check-over before the last few sectors on this historic last ever round-the-world flight.
just come through the gap between Greece on the east and the Toe of Italy on the west side near Brindisi, and that requires some quite accurate navigation. And we've been doing that with our inertial system, which has been making the turns, and we've had that updated from some ground aids. It's done it very nicely. We're now heading up the Adriatic, and we're up at 56,000 feet at the moment. It's particularly interesting for this route, really, because we haven't flown it for some time, and this aircraft used to fly it quite often because it was in the Singapore Airlines colours and was the only aircraft to be painted thus, and used to come down here all the time, of course. Just passed over a load of weather, which is always nice to see from above rather than from the side, and we're actually heading directly towards Venice.
Last stop on this extraordinary tour was this beautiful Italian city. Where better to reflect as the end of such a magical journey drew near than in one of the world's most romantic locations. Venice was to prove a memorable last stop on this trip, with its historic architecture, canals, and famous hand-blown Murano glass. As the 3 days of crisp winter sunshine gave way to wind and rain, last-minute preparations were being made as the passengers boarded Concorde Alpha Delta for the final leg of this amazing supersonic journey across the Med and Atlantic back to New York. In only 3 weeks, we'd covered over 32,000 miles in record-breaking time, taking in a huge range of diverse locations and cultures. Overall, we'd sampled the very best that the planet can offer in a trip that truly made history, breaking 10 world speed records in all. A trip surely hard to beat. As Alpha Delta climbed away into the gloomy November sky, for the lucky passengers aboard, the memories of this extraordinary trip remain vivid and bright. With Concorde now sadly confined to history, short of travelling into space, there can never be a match to this one-off, special trip of a lifetime.
This has been a particularly interesting trip because we have an opportunity to spend a lot more time with each other, the flight and the cabin crew, and also having a ground engineer with us all the way. Barry's been kept pretty busy doing all sorts of checks on the ground, comes in covered in oil, but maintains a great sense of humour, and he's been a real credit to the flight. And I think everyone appreciates that. It's been a real team effort. I think it's the last time I'll be doing a trip like this, as I've only got a few months left to fly, but the last 13 years have been tremendous fun, and particularly when we've done these sorts of trips, particularly with this, where you're staying with the passengers for quite a few days and you get to know them, and they tend to look on the aircraft as a little bit of home. and I can well identify with that. It's become very much a part of one's life, which is sorry to leave, but have no regrets, because it's been a wonderful few years.